now we were going to move on to our next item on our program, which is a panel discussion, which will be facilitated by Professor Danpath, and it will be also having the 4 college deans of teaching and learning as the panelists. And I will hand over to Professor Danpath to open the panel discussion and also introduce his panelists. Thank you. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Bulo. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to our panel of Deans of Teaching and Learning. And we'll be covering the experiential component of e-learning. Let me first introduce you to each of the members. Please welcome Professor Ruth Hoskins, who's Dean of Teaching and Learning in the College of Humanities. Professor Naven Chetty, who's Dean of Teaching and Learning in the College of Agriculture, Science and Engineering. Professor Sinegugu Duma, Dean of Teaching and Learning in the College of Health Sciences. And Professor Mkhize, Dean of Teaching and Learning in the College of Law and Management Studies. Deans of Teaching and Learning, you have arguably been in the forefront of the migration to emergency remote teaching and learning. And undoubtedly, it has been a severely traumatic experience for you, who had to literally pull out your deck of magic cards to ensure that there was some degree of continuity. And along with continuity, the daunting challenge of maintaining quality and rigor and all that goes with validity in teaching, learning, and assessment. So if we had to plot the journey that you've undertaken, there was the initial first few days and weeks of pre-planning, scoping, developing, advocating, followed by intensive supporting. Then we move on to the second phase of preserving and assuring quality of teaching and learning assessment, and having to deal with the fallout of some who argued that assessments are no longer reliable, there's been some degree of dumbing down, etc. And then, of course, the third phase, once the systems were in place, was the challenges of adoption and implementation. And this placed enormous burden on leadership alongside academics in dealing with them, especially since many of these were completely unfamiliar. And then looking ahead, we need to ask some critical questions about, is the future of higher education analog or digital or both? And how do you envision this future? So I want to, I'd like this to be a conversation, so I'll intervene as little as possible. But I'd like to ask you, Prof. Hoskins, Ruth, from your perspective, to talk about this era of the first few days, weeks, months of the migration to remote teaching and learning.
Thank you so much, Prof. Danpath. Thank you so much also for the opportunity to share this experience. And I just want to put a disclaimer out there that we're not going to be as entertaining as Craig Pruitt, so bear with us. We will, if you can use his analogy, that to make sure the islands are there, that the frameworks are in place so that we build the bridges. And just a brief context in terms of who we are as UKZN. We're a large institution with 5 campuses and almost 47,000 students. So, you know, when the announcement came from the president and the disaster plan, was declared, we as an institution had already been working and had already developed in terms of a blended learning approach. However, in terms of the migration and the change in the mindset, we've been really slow in that uptake. So when that came, for many of us, this was a blessing in disguise because it now gave us this opportunity to facilitate that change in the mindset. You heard earlier that we didn't have an online or an e-learning plan, but we had one. We had one for some of us who'd worked with 3 DVCs of teaching and learning. We already had an online e-learning plan, but we couldn't evoke it. So if we think of the analogy, we still had people who were swimming in the sea, who hadn't even gotten on to the first island, okay, into the digital island, and we were catering for them. And we had people who were on the digital island in terms of our staff, and we had people who had already crossed the bridge and were on the digital island. So bearing that in mind, what we did is the leadership came from the VC himself, Prof. Poko, and he set up an online teaching and learning task team, which was staffed by the 4 deans of teaching and learning, with Prof. Sonka chairing it with the VC when he was absent, together with the college DVCs and key executives like our executive who oversees ICS, the key units that were spoken about earlier on when they presented what they had done in terms of the migration of that student service to online. So Prof. Sonka with the 4 deans of teaching and learning was then tasked with putting together initially our emergency remote online teaching and learning plan. And the focus in that plan, as covered by the keynote speakers, was really around 4 areas. And that first area was the adoption of an online pedagogy. That was the first area. The second area, as you know, was on focusing on the use and the adoption of an online teaching and learning delivery and an assessment approach that would suit the move to the online plan. And thirdly, the staff and student capacitation so that we could take everybody with us. And then finally, the ICT infrastructure and resourcing, the access to hardware, the access to software, as well as working therefore closely for both staff and students, working closely with our ICS division. So essentially, if we look at it in a short space of time, and we didn't have much time, we literally had less than 3 weeks, right, as a team to put together these frameworks and guideline documents in place. So we worked tirelessly around the clock over weekends with Prof. Sonka to basically get the plan evoked. All right. And what it meant then in terms of the guideline documents is we had to go back to the fact that we had approved CHE programs and templates. We had to put together a revised remote teaching and learning module template where our teaching staff had to go back and re-examine core content, look at the assessment approach. We predominantly use continuous assessment, which was the departure from our previous assessment approaches. And what we did then is we provided those guidelines for them to look at whether in the revised content, as well as in the assessment approach, we were still going to be able to achieve the learning outcomes, which was key for all of our modules that we were going to deliver. Linked to that also was our motto of leaving no student behind. And Prof. Mawala spoke about this also for the UJ experience. And so we also had to evoke a catch-up plan program. But key to this was the fact that it came from a pedagogy of empathy for our students, because we knew the circumstances that they would be facing at a distance in their households, for example. So we also had to work very closely with our student support services and our counseling, our clinical counselors, to provide psychological support and psychosocial support at a distance to the students in this context. In terms of staff and student capacitation, we conducted many surveys, and the first of these was a training audit to establish where there were gaps, okay, in terms of capacity. And throughout that year, even up until now, we're still running training programs to capacitate both staff and students. Key to this online teaching and learning plan, as you know, we've migrated from an emergency plan now to purely an online plan, has also been the fact that we've had to monitor and evaluate our preparedness as well as our progress in terms of the plan. So there are ongoing mechanisms to monitor and evaluate just how effective we've actually been with the online program. And then finally, what we've done is we worked very hard with many of the, as I've said earlier, like ICS, for example, all the programs that they mentioned, like Kaltura, all right, Moodle training and so forth. We are always instrumental in working with those units to ensure that the product, that we meet that need, okay? And that need will actually feed into efficiencies when we have staff on the ground, okay, who are supported adequately, right, to ensure that we can deliver on that particular plan. So ultimately, it's about bringing everybody, okay, together, bringing everybody on board, but with a clear understanding that everybody is at a different place in terms of the development. And so the plan looks at that, and the support mechanism that we provide also is cognizant of that. So we've been fortunate, and we've really embraced, okay, we've had our staff really embrace this online teaching and learning plan. And you'll hear from my other colleagues in terms of the other issues that you've raised, Prof. Dunport, on how we've actually progressed here at UKZN. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. You've covered quite a spectrum of different aspects of development in your introductory comment. So one of the things you concluded with was talking about support, which is crucial to any enterprise of this magnitude. And of course, it raised questions about whether we should be providing the same kind of support as we did under normal circumstances. Now I want to raise, Naven, Prof. Chetty, the issue with you of how have we been providing support to academics to preserve the same degree of integrity, the same quality of teaching and learning, the same reliability of assessments as would be normal. And in fact, is this at all possible given the new era?
Good afternoon, Professor Dunpart, colleagues, attendees. It's a pleasure to address you today in this conversation on the first online e-learning symposium. Prof. Dunpart, you raised an important point, and I think it's something that's been plaguing us as an institution, and with staff maybe criticizing the way we've taken forward the online teaching and learning without having proctoring software in place. But I'll come back to that, because proctoring software and proctoring comes in as one entity of maintaining quality. The idea of online teaching and learning, as Professor Hoskins outlined, was to move away from our traditional ways of doing business. We had to under emergency circumstances, move away from that and try and address the situation on hand at the point in time. But we considered this when we developed the plan, and the plan had a very succinct and clearly outlined assessment plan. Now, this is the first time as an institution that we had an assessment plan that was implemented across all 4 colleges and in a sort of uniform manner, because the guidelines were implemented to guide how we would do online teaching and learning. And in that sense, preserve the quality, so the student experience would be the same regardless of the college that the students were in. And part of those guidelines spoke directly to when we would do moderation, how we would do external examination, what percentages of modules should be, or what percentage of a module should be evaluated and moderated. And this then placed a large emphasis on quality control. It placed a large portion of how we would ensure that in terms of monitoring and evaluation, that we could monitor and evaluate that the modules were being assessed initially in the way we would want them to be and with the same level of quality. The issues arose, though, however, when we tried to take a traditional mode of assessment and put them into a online framework. And that's where we had a little bit of struggle initially in the first iteration, with this. So academics had to quickly learn to adapt to the online mode of teaching and learning, and then use the assessment tools that were available quite at their disposal to readily run these assessments. It's not been without challenges, and I mean, any system would have its challenges, but we were pretty glad that we didn't rush to getting proctoring software at the outset, because the proctoring software have come up with really significant issues in the past couple of years. And one of those is that it does not recognize non-Caucasian faces that well. It doesn't do the facial recognition or and it does not also take into account that many of our students may not have empty rooms that they can work from. So these were issues that were at the top and foremost of our mind when we were looking at the issue of proctoring. And one of the areas that we then decided to park it was to find software and find a system that would work for us in our circumstances, our unique circumstances. I mean, we are proud of our history that we take in students from quintiles 1 to 3 as our predominant feeding into the university system. And these are the most disadvantaged of the students. So in many instances, we have to take into account their socioeconomic backgrounds before deciding on systems that are going to prejudice them in some way or another. So the proctoring system is going to be in place soon when we find we're with a system that is able to recognize and suit and conform to all the requirements that we as Deans of Teaching and Learning, together with the ICS division and our colleagues down in the trenches who are working with the students, have put together for us to get in place. And hopefully that will be done fairly soon. Another method that we tried to ensure with the modules that were in operation was the use of the QPA evaluation to look at the students' feedback. And we ran, in fact, 2 surveys at the start of the onset of teaching and learning that gave us rich, vibrant feedback from the student and staff in order to take this online learning in the direction we wanted to. You know, the comments that were made by the staff and students at that point really helped shape the online teaching and learning plan and gave us the ability to quality control, because we knew where the problems were going to be. We could put measures such as training in place to help the staff and students to navigate this online world and then evaluate that at the end. So we used evaluation techniques of surveys and feedbacks from staff through both formal and informal surveys to interrogate the modules and the delivery and the assessment. And in that way, we maintained the quality and the integrity. I think another area that we really worked on was staff innovation. You know, it was really great to see staff innovating and trying to maintain quality in their modules by developing new techniques. I mean, we had academics sharing their experiences through the communities of practices, and some of them were quite innovative. For example, switching on your computer, your camera, or using your cell phone as a camera and answering the test online through your laptop. So in that sense, they tried to maintain quality. So a lot of the quality control also devolved down to the level of the academic in the classroom and in their situation to try and maintain the quality and control over the delivery of the curriculum in the limited framework that we had at that point. And I think a lot depended on community of practices, collegiality, staff to engage with external examiners, moderators, and assessors to make sure that their modules were delivered with the same quality and rigor that the assessments were delivered with the same quality and rigor that they would have done pre-COVID-19 as they were doing in the post-COVID-19 sort of emergency remote online teaching and learning. And I think part of the challenges were initially just trying to get our heads wrapped around how we would put an online, for example, in mathematics or in a subject like music, how would you put assessment online? And how would you then be able to ensure that the integrity and the quality of the systems were sufficient to know that the experience the student had pre-COVID-19 and the assessment rigor of pre-COVID-19 was the same in post-COVID-19. And the continuous assessment mode of teaching and learning was instrumental in delivering this outcome. It helped us ensure that students got the necessary assessment done, but also gave them multiple opportunities so as to also not prejudice them from underperforming. But at the same time, it gave us the quality control mechanism of ongoing assessment to engage with the student and determine progress as they moved along. So I think that's my very brief introduction to that, Professor Danpat. And I'm sure my colleagues could touch if I've left anything out. I've tried to navigate around all the aspects, but as I said, it's quite complicated and quite a lot to deal with. But I have touched the most important ones in my opinion, but my colleagues will definitely help bring more online if I haven't done anything extra. Thank you.
Thank you, Naven. You certainly have covered a rather broad spectrum of concerns and challenges. And thank you for reminding us that UKZN has made a ethically grounded policy decision to serve underserved communities. So our student demographic now reflects that more than 60% of our students come from quintiles 1 to 3. And with that comes a host of psychosocial problems, learning difficulties, and related concerns. And I want to now turn my attention to you, Prof. Duma, particularly since you are a health practitioner and you are acutely conscious of mental health of students. And you have been involved in the ethics of care regarding student learning. Can you share with us how UKZN has been dealing with that component, please?
Thank you, Professor Danpath, and thanks, thank you, colleagues, that is Professor Hoskins and Professor Chetty for the foregrounding that you have given. I am sure if you were here this morning, you would agree with me that the main challenge really that we had was being parachuted by COVID-19 into this island, finding that we had to swim and had to swim and without that bridge, expecting both our staff, our colleagues, as well as the students to swim the same in order to get to, say, a safe space. It was quite difficult because one of the main things that we had in our minds was that we needed to save the academic year 2020. We needed to make sure that we left no student behind and we left no staff behind. However, challenges came when we looked at the surveys that we took, when students highlighted the disparities in terms of access to the gadgets to be used. When we say we're transitioning to online teaching and learning, the gadgets, the networks, because suddenly the university was closed and students had to return home. Now, we heard this morning from Professor Mazibuko on what they had provided. However, it translated more for us now who were on the receiving end in the classroom, when you would, as teachers, put up things only to find that the students were not necessarily available or accessing because of no data or other challenges, especially recognizing the strategy that the university has taken to look at having the students from those differently resourced communities. So really, it was a challenge that the university, especially with the assistance from ICS, really took up and tried to make sure that no student was left behind and the academic year was saved. However, also on our side, we made sure that there were plans that were made for students to make sure that they were not left behind. For instance, we had to come up with catch-up plans for students who could not avail themselves either for assessments or who could not participate fully. We had to come up with the catch-up plans. That on its own put a lot of pressure on the academics, who had to not only prepare the teach, but also had to make sure that they were available for these catch-up plans. In addition, of course, we had to also make sure that, because we knew that these challenges were going to affect even how the students were doing or performing in the programs, we had to request a special code, which was, of course, the first time that such a code had to come through, which is a COVID-related or CR code, which identified those students who had challenges. So in a way, while we were looking at the academic side of things and making sure that we were having these catch-up plans, we're aware that we don't want people to be affected in their transcripts going forward. Because if you have a CR code, then there were it identified you as a person that had struggled. But really on many other levels, I think when you spoke about me coming from the caring profession, one of the things that we identified for both ourselves and assuming that it was the same for the students as well as for our colleagues was the issue of social isolation and loneliness with all the related mental health issues that affect it. In addition to that, there were also fears of threats of hacking and protection of our online information. So we had to really come up with strategies that were going to be simple but effective in cases of ensuring that even among ourselves as the 4 deans of teaching and learning, as well as the academic leaders of teaching and learning in our colleges, we realized that we needed to be on constant communication over and above the services that the university offers. And knowing that there was an overload of emails and overload of WhatsApp messages, we had to come up with other strategies. For instance, we came up with, we downloaded Signal, which was specifically for communication among ourselves. And we also knew that we needed to look after each other. And that was more obvious among the 4 deans of teaching and learning, where if we don't see you, if we don't hear from you, we would actually send you a signal message to say, hey, the meeting has started. Where are you? What is happening? Because we realized that we needed that kind of support for each other more than what the university was providing. And also there was so much panic among our colleagues in the colleges. So we knew that we needed, where maybe under normal circumstances, we would be meeting with people once every month. We were meeting with academic leaders of teaching and learning more frequently on weekly basis, but at the same time, adding more strategies of being available for each other. That was one of the things that really kept us intact and making sure that whatever disruptions that were brought by COVID-19 didn't have a major effect on our purpose, which was at that time saving the academic year for our programs. Your question was really on the support, and that is what I think I've covered, but I don't know if there is more that may need to be indicated.
I think you've covered quite articulately the psychosocial domain, which I was trying to establish, and the extent to which that has been enabling or paralyzing at UKZN. Thank you for that. So, colleagues, the tone thus far from deans is one of hope. It's positive. Yes, there have been challenges, but those challenges have helped us build resilience. And I want to turn my attention now to our IT professor, our specialist, to get a sense of where do you see us going as higher education as we negotiate the future? Has this pandemic been a boon for us? Has it been a blessing in disguise? Or how do you see the future, sir?
Thank you, Prof. Danpat. Good afternoon, colleagues. Well, Prof, my answer to your question is about a blessing in disguise is yes or no. But I'll start with the yes one. there is a paradigm shift in the teaching and learning practices. There's a shift from pedagogical education to pedagogical education. And the pedagogical education, it is teacher-centered, but the pedagogical education, it is self-management learning or self-managed learning and self-determined learning. So it means the students in the pedagogy education are autonomous, highly independent. So the learners there are independent and they are able to manage their own learning. So that is why the winners indicated that, you know, at the two winners, they spoke about the independent and as well as autonomous. So they are talking about the pedagogy education. And the blended learning approach, the flipped classroom approach is part of the pedagogy paradigm, part of the pedagogy education. And in the pedagogy education, you also get the learning theories that are very, very important for online teaching, the constructivism as well as the connectivism, also called distributed learning. So those two paradigms, I mean, two learning theories are part of the are part of the pedagogy education. And so it's very, very important to note that we are no longer in the pedagogy. When we talk about pedagogy, that is child laning. Now, pedagogy, that is self in English, in Latin, it is heta. So now it's pedagogy. So we'll talk about self-managed learning. So where we talk about students must collaborate, students must communicate, they must be creative and critical thinking in that pedagogy education. So it's a blessing in disguise that, hey, now we use the pedagogy paradigm because the learners there are highly independent, the learners are highly autonomous. And the fear of online teaching and learning is no longer there now. It's completely disappeared. So now we are better equipped to adopt the blended learning approach, the flipped classroom approach, because learning in the blended learning approach, the flipped classroom approach is 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So there is formal education and non-formal education. The formal education is in class, when the students are in class, perhaps in a Zoom class. And the non-formal, it's when the students, they access the material at home. That is asynchronous learning. They access the material at home, but in a Zoom class, that is synchronous learning. So the learning is 24/7. So now we are ready now to implement to adopt the blended learning approach, because this blended learning approach is very, very important, because in this approach, the students, they learn the technical skills. For example, the content, they learn the content, the module content, course content. They also learn the pervasive skills that are important, the enabling skills that are important during the online class when we use the blended learning. And on top of that, we also learned new ways of supporting the students, that you can support your students using the learning management system. For example, Moodle, using the discussion forum. You can assist your students perhaps using your WhatsApp group, using Signal, perhaps using Telegram. So, and the support could be even students can support themselves. It can be student to student support, because they form groups. And even consultation used to be on-site consultation. Now you can have the online consultation, and it can be one-to-one or one-to-many. And we also have resources that are important. For example, the Google Drive resources are available for free. And as a teacher, as an academic, you can use those resources in class. Those resources are very, very important, and they are available for free. And some resources are available at a cost. And some organizations, they also develop material and upload it onto Moodle, like the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We do develop the material and then we upload it onto Moodle, and other universities in South Africa and in the world. So material is available on YouTube. So the students, the academics can access the material. My no, Prof, is about the technology has created a huge digital divide. So students who are from privileged backgrounds, they are at an advantage. And students who are poor, from low-income families who are getting low-income household, so the students are at a disadvantage. And then you'll find that even students who are good, who are from the poor families, perhaps they cannot even access the material that is uploaded onto Moodle. Because perhaps in the area where they are residing, there's no electricity, there's no connectivity. But government must play a part. Government must play a part. They must install electricity in all the areas. And we have to give students enough data to, so that they can access the material, they can attend even the online classes. When it comes to, Prof, I agree with you. I regard the sudden transformation as a blessing in disguise. Although there's that 20% for the digital divide that I'm not happy with. But when it comes to the future of the online learning, I see us at UKZN adopting the blended learning approach. Perhaps even when we calculate our notional learning hours, perhaps we are going to consider this non-formal learning, because students are learning, not that they learn in class, they also learn outside the class, because you can learn anywhere, anytime. That's why we talk about asynchronous learning. So when we calculate notional learning hours at UKZN, we must consider this type of learning. On top of that, I see us at UKZN now offering postgraduate programs, offering the programs online. That's what I see, opening access. And I see now our students, older students now joining our university for upskilling and for changing career paths. And I also see UKZN also having a block style lectures. For example, we can have an on-site lecture 1 week and another week, perhaps an online lecture. That's how I see it. And now fighting for space. Hey, space is no longer a constraint now. It's no longer a constraint now. And we are going to have online lectures or online tutorials or perhaps online symposium, online conference if we do not have a space. So this is a way forward for me. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you, Msizi. Thank you, Prof. Your message is certainly inspiring, filled with hope, but also you've cautioned us about the blind spots and the blank spots about the digital divide and its implications for ethics and equity. And I know that the forthcoming parallel sessions will be covering some of the issues that you've raised. So, Deans, let me thank you once again for a truly inspiring session. We've lost quite a lot of time. I'd love to take discussion, but with your permission, I'd now like to hand over back to the program manager to commence with the parallel sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Prof. And thank you to our panelists for a very informative and enlightening panel discussion. And I'm sure some of us were not aware as to how much of work was done behind the scenes before we actually even started the migration into online learning. All they saw was the university just going online and thought maybe somebody somewhere had a magic wand that they just waved around and then we all just migrated. But I think through this panel discussion, we have had an understanding as to how much went into the transition and also what informed the decision. And also what I'd really like to highlight again, because it keeps coming up, is that UKZN at some point, it seems like we had a crystal ball of some sorts because we had positioned ourselves to be able to transition smoothly when it was demanded by the advent of COVID to actually transition. So well done to the colleagues within the space for the extremely wonderful work that they have done to ensure that we have that smooth transition. However, as we had this morning, you'll always have teething problems when technology is involved, but I think it's better to learn the lessons at the beginning and then from there have a smooth sailing ship into the island, as Craig Blewett, Prof. Blewett called it this earlier this morning.